I'm Tom from Do It Yourself Home Automation, and today I am taking a look at my Leica Q camera and answering any questions that people have asked and sharing a little bit of information about some of the photos and some sample photos that I've taken on my Leica Q. I have my Q here with me. And this was inspired by a video that I did at the end of January, a review of my Leica Q after 4 years and 500,000 photos taken on the camera. And it's been really popular. It's gotten about 2,700 views in that fairly short time since I published it at the end of January there. And just a lot of great discussion, people chiming in, people who use the Q, people asking questions about how I use it. And a lot of people asking for sample photos because I didn't include sample photos in my original review. So I wanted to do a stream today. If people are tuning in live, you're welcome to ask questions in the live chat, and I can answer any questions you have about the Leica Q, about what I use it for. I'm also happy to answer questions if you are watching this after the fact and put them in there too. I think I'll start just giving a little bit of background. Leica Q is basically a camera that I think actually started the mirrorless revolution, or at least pushed it forward a lot. And there were earlier cameras, as people pointed out in response to my video, that were mirrorless and that kind of moved in that direction. But they were generally micro four thirds sensors. And this is, with the Q, really one of the first cameras to put a full frame sensor into a really compact mirrorless package like this. And what you get as a result of that is that this has a 24 megapixel full frame sensor like you would find in a standard DSLR, but it's crammed into this package that's 1.4 pounds. And as you can see, I mean, tiny, something you can easily wear. It's got this really nice leather strap. You can easily wear this around your neck and go out in the field and take pictures all day long. And it's much less obtrusive than an SLR, DSLR, and again, a lot lighter, but you still get that full frame sensor and really, really incredible image quality. And I'm a professional photojournalist, so I use the camera all the time. And I went back and looked and saw that I'd taken about over 500,000 photos on it since I got it in 2016. And you can see from looking at my Q that it's definitely kind of beat up and banged up, and I've got my little thumb rest on the back here where a lot of the paint is worn off, and little dings and dents from dropping this, being out in the field taking photos. Overall, I think it's held up really well. I do get it serviced. That was one of the questions that people asked me, and I can talk a little bit about that. But this is definitely the best camera that I've owned. I love the Q. There's other kinds of Leica cameras that are good for particular things, like studio photography. But for a photojournalist, where you want to have your camera with you all the time, still be able to take really amazing photos, but have something that's super compact and super unobtrusive, the Leica Q is really the best for that. Some other features here. It's got a 28 millimeter prime lens. It's a fixed lens, so there's no zoom. As they say, you zoom with your feet, so if you want to get closer to something, you're going to walk there. And it's, again, like a real Leica glass. It's an f1.7, so it's a super fast lens. Unlike the M series, the Q has full autofocus. All of the controls are broken out as physical controls on the camera itself. So you've got an aperture selector on the lens here, and you can go in. I'll try to make this a little bit bigger. Let's see. Go in and see your aperture settings up on right by the lens, and easily just adjust this. Then there's a macro ring you can switch over here if you want to take photos at a closer range, and you can see really beautiful Leica design. When you switch that, the focusing scale on the lens actually slides and changes. So you can see focusing scale for macro versus standard. And then it's got the autofocus setting, but you can also click this little ring over, and then you can actually choose a manual focus point. So you can do zone focusing if you're doing street photography, or you can set a particular focus point if you have it on a tripod for sports or whatever, and then click it back in over to the autofocus setting. Does accept filters on the front. There's a ring you can remove here and then be able to put filters on. I usually don't use filters with it. And then this lens cap, again, really beautiful Leica design. This is just fits on here with friction. There's no like screwing in of that lens cap. And the tolerances are just so tight that even after 4 years, I can literally just pop this thing on and off and it stays on. It's not going to fall if I wear this around during the day. Again, the full frame sensor combined with that prime 28mm fixed lens, just really beautiful, really good light sensitivity with the f1.7 aperture. And, overall, just really amazing optics on here. The macro mode's great for getting close. You also have the shutter control broken out up here. Because it's mirrorless, you have an electronic viewfinder on the back that I think is 1.3 megapixels. So it's so good it almost looks kind of 3D when you look through it. But I want to answer some questions people wrote in with, and also to share some sample photos. So one thing people were really interested by, I think, in my original video is the fact that I'd taken over 500,000 photos on this camera. And, people were, I guess, surprised by that. I think for a professional photographer, and particularly doing photojournalism, that's not that many. If you think about, if I go out pre-COVID, I'd probably go out and do a sort of formal shoot at least once a week, be out for the full day. You can easily take 2,000, 5,000, maybe even more photos in a couple of hours shoot if you're out there really shooting away. And if you do that every week for 4 years, that's hundreds of thousands of photos right there. So 500,000 is, good, I think. But it's, if you're doing this professionally, then it's not such a shocking number. Then you add in the fact that I would often travel with the camera, and I do on location shoots and that kind of thing where, maybe I'd be traveling for 5-6 days and taking 5,000 photos a day. So you rack up quite a lot of photos in a pretty short time doing that. So 500,000 photos, I think, is pretty reasonable. And I have other cameras, so it's not my only camera I'm using, but a lot of the sort of the shoots I was doing, and still do to some extent, are here on the Leica Q. If you're going to take 500,000 photos with it, you're going to probably have to have it serviced. That was another question that a lot of people wrote in with. And I think that, that's important. So Leica really does stand behind their products. And I send my Q in about once a year to be serviced. And some people were asking about what's involved in that. So let me click over here. We'll take a look. And I posted the info I got from Leica. Let me see if I got, here. So this is the notes from the Leica Tech on my last service. Strong traces of use. Like these little, dings and dents and scratches and stuff. They adjusted the sensor and cleaned the sensor. So one of the kind of fatal flaws, I guess I would say, of the Q is that it's not at all weather sealed, so dust does get in. And because it's a fixed prime lens, or I guess just because it's a fixed lens, you can't take the lens off and clean the sensor. So you really have to send it in periodically because you will get sensor dust, and there's not really a way for you to clean that off yourself. So I do send it into Leica, and they clean it, and it comes back with no dust and looks great. They adjust the sensor. Probably just over time, it gets a little bit out of spec. Adjusting the autofocus, that's one I definitely noticed at the last service. I was starting to get not great, fixed, like locking onto focus, and around the edges, especially the frame, was getting a lot of distortion, and this definitely made it a lot better to send this in. So it's important to send it in. It costs a couple $100, but again, if you're investing in something like the Leica Q, which is probably about $5,000 by the time you add in the accessories and memory cards and all that kind of stuff, then it's worth spending a few $100s a year to have it serviced properly. For my services are done in New Jersey. I work through my Leica store in San Francisco. They send it back to New Jersey. The tech service it there usually takes a couple weeks, comes back to me. If it's really bad, if you drop it in a lake or something, then they'll actually send it back to Wetzlar, Germany, where Leica makes these, and they'll do a full-on service of it there. But I find that just sending it to New Jersey is usually plenty. Just the autofocus, check, adjust, clean, and then sealing of the sensor. So they try to kind of clear out the sensor so that it doesn't get as much dust in the future, and try to do better sealing around it. But you always do run the risk with the Leica Q of getting a little bit of sensor dust. So again, it's important, especially on the smaller, so it's f16 or even an f8, you start to see the dust very clearly. If you're shooting wide open like an f1.7, you're probably not going to see it that much. So Often I'll shoot with a wider aperture as it gets dustier, so you don't end up having to go through and remove so much sensor dust. Let's see, a lot of people, talking about the amount of photos I've taken. Good to see someone actually uses their Leica. Yeah, I think sometimes these are, something people wear like a statement piece or like a piece of jewelry, very expensive piece of jewelry. And that's, not what I'm using it for. Again, I am a professional photojournalist, and you really can take pro quality photos with the Leica Q. So let me segue then into showing, some of the photos that I've taken on here. If you are tuning in live, feel free to ask any questions that you have. So a lot of people ask for sample photos. This is one I like. This is Bar Bouchon in Beverly Hills. Unfortunately, no more. This is one of Thomas Keller's restaurants. Always loved hanging out there. I like it with this one how the very wide, is relatively wide angle with a 28 millimeter versus what you normally see with like a 35. You get more of the architecture. You get this scene where you can see all these different conversations happening and people interacting, especially with COVID, where you can't go to a restaurant really anymore. It would be hard to do something this close together. This is always just a really bustling, nice place. Also, because of the really good light sensitivity on the Q, we're able to get all the detail in the shadows. We can even see into the interior here and pick up details. I can see there's like a Walgreens symbol here. I can read some of the sign at the end, and you really just get a very good depth in here. And you can get the color and pull the color and detail out of the shadows there. This is a photo I'm really happy with. This is in the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. I did a lot of work documenting what was happening. And this is, I think, a good example of a closed restaurant. And obviously the visual metaphor here is really strong. It's obvious that this is a closed restaurant, the caution tape around the chairs up on the table. But at the same time, because of I shot this at a very sort of wide, probably an f1.7 aperture, you get that beautiful bokeh, the blurring of the background from the Q. And so although the chairs are and the caution tape are really in focus, the background of the restaurant is almost totally blurred because of that very shallow depth of field from that aperture, that very wide open aperture. And I think that's nice because this becomes an image that can illustrate the general concept of a closed restaurant. It's not clearly a specific restaurant, and it becomes a stand-in for pretty much any restaurant out there. And that's really helpful because it can then be used to illustrate a much wider variety of photos. And you can go through and look where this has been used. Here it is in Bloomberg, somewhere down here. Yeah, there we go. Bloomberg looks like they used it. Looks like Newsweek used it here. Let's see if we can see this one. Sometimes you can't actually see on there. But it was probably used in this article. Yeah, so these end up definitely getting picked up. And again, it just becomes representative of the concept of a closed restaurant. That's something I like about that photo. Again, achievable with the Q because you do have that ability to really dial in with the aperture and keep crisp focus in the foreground, but keep the background nicely blurred. This is another one I'm proud of. This is a self-portrait at the beginning of the pandemic. This is what I looked like going out and shooting in the early days with the gloves, the mask. This wasn't intentional, but my shirt picked up a lot of the color here, and then the background picked up a lot of the color as well. So I think this is a nice self-portrait. And obviously I wasn't going to have someone else photograph me in the early days when it was really got my press pass here. Early days, it was hard to do anything with other people around. So this is actually, this is a sculpture in front of the Chase Center in San Francisco. There's 3 mirrored balls here, and the photo is taken in the mirrored surface of the one in front of me here. So you see I'm framed by these 2 parts of the sculpture, and I'm actually using the third part of the sculpture to take this self-portrait. And so that's an example, I think, a good example of wearing the Q around your neck. It's very unobtrusive, and this is obviously taken on the Q that I'm holding there in my hand. So I'll often wear it around my neck, and then when I'm out in the field, I can basically just rest my hand on top of it. I can walk along and I can snap photos really easily. It's very, very unobtrusive because the lens is the shutter rather is very silent. And it actually, at a high enough shutter speed, it goes to a fully electronic shutter over 1/2000th, I believe. It'll go to automatically go to a electronic shutter, so it's totally silent. And that makes for, in this case, a nice self-portrait. But when you're out shooting, it's really great because it's basically silent. So you're not bothering people and you're very unobtrusive, versus if you're schlepping around a giant SLR camera trying to take photos in a crowd, you're going to immediately draw attention to yourself and, often unwanted attention. Versus, with something like this, you can take really nice street photos without having to worry about that. This is an example of that kind of photography. So this is Chinatown in San Francisco. And this illustrates a couple of things. One is that style of being able to walk around and take those kinds of street photos without really being obtrusive or interrupting the scene. This is one where I'm out there at night. And, another thing here, I think this is a good illustration of the fact that the Q can lock autofocus. I'm obviously not actually focusing this. I'm actually wearing it around my neck and just walking and snapping. And I can generally know how to position the camera to frame things properly. I've just used it for so long, even if it's around my neck. But it will lock in with the autofocus, and you can see we got a nice crisp photo here. The other thing that I like is that because of that very good wide aperture and that amazing Leica glass, you can get really good photos of even night scenes like this, where it was totally dark out except for the illumination we get from the neon and from the street lights. And you can see there's almost no aberrations or flaring or anything around that very bright street light. So you just get this sort of brilliant flash of light in the middle of the frame. And then the people here, particularly the woman in the foreground, are really just sort of frozen in motion there and in pretty perfect focus, even though, again, this is something that I'm shooting from waist level. And you can see the perspective is just a little bit lower, which is a style that I really like with the Q, because, again, you can wear it around your neck. And I will usually leave it on an autofocus with a multi-point or a facial recognition focus, which it has. I'll go for usually a fairly wide aperture. Sometimes, like in this night shot, I'd be down at f1.7. You're going to get a fairly narrow depth of field, so it really has to nail the focus. And I'll usually be on either S, which is a single shot, or continuous mode, and I'll just be mashing the shutter button when I see something good. Again, why I'm at 500,000 plus photos. I'd say of 500,000 photos, I've taken probably 30 to 40,000 of those are actually usable. Most of them don't get used because there's probably, for one shot like this that worked, there's probably 50 where this person had walked out of the frame or had focused on something else in there. So that's one of the advantages, is you can just shoot away and then edit later. If you're just tuning in, I'm talking about some of my work with the Leica Q. I'm a professional photojournalist, and I've been using the Leica Q for about 4 years. I've taken over 500,000 photos on it, and they've been used in publications all over the place. I was showing some in Newsweek here, Bloomberg we looked at. Basically, most publications out there that you've read have probably used photos that I've taken on my Q. And I'm happy to share more of those if people have specific questions. This is live, so feel free to ask any questions you have about the Q. And I just showed some examples of work that I really like, photos that I'm proud of, or things that I think are illustrative of strengths that the camera has. That's a couple of examples, just responding to some viewer questions there. The other thing I would say about the camera is that if you really want to get the best quality out of it, you absolutely have to develop your photos. It's really not enough with the Q just to snap things. You really have to take raw photos and then use a program like I use Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom, to actually do my basically development almost of the photos, of the digital negatives after I snap those pictures. So a photo like this, where we've preserved the colors and the lights, but we've kept the dark background. This I would have taken raw. When it comes out of the camera, the Q defaults to making it extremely flat. So if you shoot with a Q and you're not a professional and you don't know that you have to develop your photos, the photos will come out looking very flat and boring. And the reason for that is that they don't really care, I guess, about, for amateurs or people who don't want to put in the time to develop their photos. and optimizing for that. Flat colors, flat exposure settings is ideal for a professional because you're starting from a blank slate. You're not starting from the camera's own decisions about how you should edit your photo. And so you do have to go in Lightroom, do the development, get the exposure right, get the colors right. Because I'm a reportage style photojournalist, there's very strict standards in our industry around editing. So you have to make sure also that you're not reading anything into the shot that wasn't there, bumping up the colors, to be more saturated than they really were. It requires remembering exactly what the shot looked like originally, what the actual scene looked like when you were there, and then going in and editing. But if you can do that, you can get just an amazing level of data out of the Q and an amazing quality of images there. So let me pull up here also, and feel free again if you have questions, jump in. I just want to pull up here. This is a live stream of some of the images that I've taken, and let's look at some of these. Many of these were taken on the Q. Here's a more of an illustrative image of the Parlor logo. This was taken on my Q. It's actually my thumb there. It's in a dark bathroom. And one of the things that's nice, this is looks like it ran in Ars Technica. One of the nice things with the Q is that you can go into these settings where you have almost no light, and it was able to focus on the screen there of my phone, and I was able to preserve the colors and the logo here and keep this background black, which creates this really nice sort of creepy look, but still be able to capture all the detail and end up with something that doesn't have really any noise. You can say there's really no noise here, even on my thumb, and that's again a testament to the quality of the sensor on the Q. Let's see some other ones here, just general sort of architectural shots. Let's see, where is this? Kansas City Business Journal. This is a situation where, one thing that can be a little challenging with the Q is that it does have that 28 millimeter focal length. So you're not going to get a real, it's a pretty wide shot. So you're not going to get a real ability to zoom in very easily. And so one thing that I do is take a picture at the 24 megapixels, the 28 millimeter setting, and then I'll crop into it. And I try to preserve the industry standard. It's about 17 megapixels. So you can zoom in quite a bit and preserve that since you have 24 to work with. And that allows you to go a little bit tighter to get almost a zoom effect, just cropping into the original image to get closer, in this case, to a sign that was on the side of a building. This is another good example of, let's see, where did this one run? PC Mag. This is a Tesla supercharger. And this is, I think, a good example of the bokeh, again, on the camera. We can get the Tesla logo, and you even start to lose a little bit of focus on the side here, which I think is okay. But the background is totally blurred because this is probably at a f2.8. And you're able to preserve a lot of that detail. And again, it really isolates the Tesla here, makes it obvious that we're dealing with a logo, and the background becomes kind of irrelevant. If you took this on a cell phone, the background would be in crisp focus. You'd see the other signs and cars, and you're not drawing the viewer's eyes to the actual subject, which is, in this case, the logo. Let's take a look at maybe one or two more here. Again, if you have any questions, please do chime in. The chat is open on the sides if you have anything you want to know, or if you're watching this after the fact, please feel free to ask anything there. I love the colors on this one. This is in downtown Mountain View, the former office of 23andMe. This, I think, is a nice example of if you've got good light, really easy to set up kind of shot. You can really get a lot of great color, and you get the blueness of these windows up here. You get a little bit of the reflection. And this really crisp logo from 23andMe. Let's see if there's any others that stand out here. Yeah, I mean, same type of deal where you can really focus the viewer's eye onto a particular architectural detail, particular sign, in this case, SF Gate, looking at Yelp's headquarters. And this is a situation where I actually shot it at a tighter aperture. So this is probably an f8, maybe even a little bit smaller of an aperture, and you get Yelp's logo, which is crisp and centered here, but you still can actually see the Montgomery Street, New Montgomery, on the building itself in the background. So this is an example of stopping it down a little bit and ending up with a deeper depth of field, and thus your ability to be able to capture more of the detail in the background. This is, capturing this really beautiful Art Deco design here, in addition to having the Yelp logo. So yeah, that's some examples of actual uses, actual photos. Those are things a lot of people had asked about. We talked about a little bit of how I get to 500,000 photos, and a little bit about what I do to get the camera serviced. A lot of people just shared really positive thoughts about the Leica Q. A lot of people asking for sample pictures, so I'll probably go in and throw this in. A little bit of pushback on calling this the camera that launched the mirrorless revolution. I still stand by that. I think the innovation of putting a full-frame sensor in a camera that weighs 1.4 pounds with a battery, I should say. It's got a lithium-ion battery, because this is Leica. This is like a $90 part to add another battery to it. You definitely pay for quality with them, which is fine. And I think that's covering most of what I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. If not, please subscribe to my channel if you're watching this. I'll do more about the Leica Q. If you have other questions, put them in the responses after the fact, questions down there. I'm happy to do another stream, talk a little bit more about the camera, and share anything. You can also follow me on Medium, talk about the camera there in a lot of different articles, usually on debugger.medium.com, or follow me on Twitter at TomSmith585. Thanks for tuning in.